USS Utah was the second of the two Florida-class dreadnought battleships. The first U.S. Navy vessel to bear the name of the state of Utah. She measured 521 feet 6 inches in overall length, with a beam of 88 feet 3 inches and a draft of 28 feet 6 inches. She displaced 21,825 long tons as built and up to 23,033 long tons when fully loaded. Propulsion came from 4-shaft Parsons steam turbines, producing 28,000 standard horsepower, fed by 12 coal-fired Babcock and Wilcox boilers, giving her a maximum speed of 20.75 knots. Her cruising range reached 5,776 nautical miles at 10 knots. She carried a complement of 1,001 officers and enlisted men. The ship carried a main battery of 10 12-inch Mark V guns, housed in 5 twin turrets along the center line, with 2 arranged in a super-firing pair forward and the remaining 3 positioned aft of the superstructure. Her secondary armament comprised 16 5-inch guns set in casemates along the hull. In keeping with capital ship practice of the era, she also mounted 2 21-inch broadside torpedo tubes submerged within the hull. Her main armor belt was 11 inches thick. The armored deck measured 1.5 inches, the turret faces carried 12 inches of protection, and the conning tower featured 11.5 inches thick sides. Utah was laid down at the New York Shipbuilding Corporation on March 15, 1909, launched on December 23, 1909, and commissioned into the U.S. Navy on August 31, 1911. She then carried out a shakedown cruise with stops at Hampton Roads, Santa Rosa Island, Pensacola, Galveston, Kingston, Jamaica, and Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Assigned to the Atlantic Fleet in March 1912, she subsequently took part in gunnery practice before entering overhaul at the New York Navy Yard on April 16th. Departing New York on June 1st, she made her way to Annapolis via Hampton Roads, arriving on June 6th. There, she embarked naval cadets from the Naval Academy for a midshipman training cruise off New England, which continued until August 25th. For the next 2 years, Utah maintained a similar pattern of training operations and midshipman cruises in the Atlantic. In November 1913, she conducted a goodwill voyage to European waters, including a call at Villefranche, France. In early 1914, amid the Mexican Revolution, the United States chose to intervene. While sailing south on April 16th, Utah was ordered to intercept the German steamer SS Ipiranga, which was transporting arms to Mexican leader Victoriano Huerta. Ipiranga's approach to Veracruz triggered the U.S. occupation of the city. Utah and her sister ship Florida were the first American warships to arrive. Together, they put ashore a combined force of 1,000 Marines in blue jackets on the 21st of April. During the next 3 days, the Marines fought street to street against local forces, suffering 94 casualties while inflicting hundreds of deaths on the Mexican side. Utah remained off Veracruz for 2 months before returning to the New York Navy Yard for overhaul in late June. She then spent the next 3 years performing the usual cycle of training and exercises with the Atlantic Fleet. After the United States entered World War I on April 6, 1917, declaring war on Germany for its unrestricted submarine campaign, Utah was stationed in Chesapeake Bay to train engine room crews and gunners for the rapidly growing Fleet. On August 30th, 1918, she sailed for Bantry Bay, Ireland, carrying Vice Admiral Henry T. Mayo, Commander-in-Chief of the Atlantic Fleet. Upon arrival, Utah became the flagship of Battleship Division 6, led by Rear Admiral Thomas S. Rogers. The division's mission was to protect convoys in the western approaches from potential German surface raiders, with Utah operating alongside Nevada and Oklahoma. After the armistice in November 1918, Utah visited the Isle of Portland in Britain and later escorted the liner George Washington in December as it carried President Woodrow Wilson to Brest, France, for the Versailles peace negotiations. Utah departed Brest on December 14th and reached New York on the 25th. She remained there until January 30th, 1919, then resumed the standard peacetime pattern of fleet drills and training cruises. In July of 1921, Utah sailed for Europe, making stops in Lisbon, Portugal, and Cherbourg, France. Upon arrival, she assumed duty as the flagship of American naval forces in European waters, a position she held until relieved by the armored cruiser USS Pittsburgh in October 1922. Utah returned to the United States on October 21st and resumed her former role as flagship of Battle Division 6. Under the terms of the 1930 London Naval Treaty, Utah was selected for conversion into a radio-controlled target ship to replace the older North Dakota. On July 1st, 1931, she was redesignated AG-16. All of her primary and secondary armament was removed, though the turrets themselves remained in place. Her aviation equipment and the torpedo blisters added in 1925 were also removed. The conversion was finished by April 1st, 1932, when she was recommissioned. On April 7th, Utah departed Norfolk for sea trials to train her engine room crew and test her new radio control systems. She could now be operated at varied speeds and course changes, maneuvers typical of combat, through electric motors activated by signals from the controlling ship, which adjusted throttle valves, steered the rudder, and regulated boiler oil flow. A Sperry gyro pilot also kept her steady on course. She completed her radio control testing on May 6th and on June 1st operated for 3 hours entirely under remote control. On June 9th, she sailed from Norfolk to San Pedro, Los Angeles, joining Training Squadron 1 of the Base Force, United States Fleet. Beginning in late July, she undertook her first target duties, initially for Pacific Fleet cruisers and later for the battleship Nevada. She continued in this capacity for the next 9 years. In May 1935, she took part in Fleet Problem 16, serving as a transport for a Marine contingent. The following month, she was modified to train anti-aircraft crews as well as perform target work, receiving an experimental quadruple 1.1-inch caliber anti-aircraft mount for testing and crew development. Utah returned to the Atlantic in January 1939 to take part in Fleet Problem 20, and later that year trained with Submarine Squadron 6. She subsequently shifted back to the Pacific, reaching Pearl Harbor on August 1, 1940, where she conducted anti-aircraft gunnery training until December 14th, before departing for Long Beach, California, and arriving on December 21st. There she served as a bombing target for aircraft from the carriers Lexington, Saratoga, and Enterprise. Utah returned to Pearl Harbor on April 1st 1941, and resumed anti-aircraft training. In May, she sailed to Los Angeles to embark a Marine contingent from the Fleet Marine Force for transport to Bremerton, Washington, after which she entered the Puget Sound Navy Yard at the end of the month for overhaul. During this refit, she received new single-mount, 5-inch caliber dual-purpose guns to enhance anti-aircraft training. Departing Puget Sound on the 14th of September, she set course for Pearl Harbor, where she resumed her routine duties for the remainder of the year. On the quiet morning of Sunday, December 7th, her crew expecting an easy, uneventful day, she shared the west side of Ford Island with several neighbors, the seaplane tender Tangier moored just aft, and the cruisers Raleigh and Detroit positioned directly ahead. Like most sailors in the Pacific Fleet, few aboard Utah believed war would reach Hawaii. The island seemed far too remote for a serious air attack, and the destroyers and battleships at Pearl Harbor were thought fully capable of handling any submarines or surface vessels daring enough to approach. The harbor to them felt completely secure. Just before 0800, sailors on deck spotted aircraft sweeping over the south end of Ford Island. Sunday flight drills were unusual but not unheard of, so no one was alarmed. Even when explosions echoed across the harbor, Utah's crew assumed the exercises were simply unusually intense that day. That illusion vanished at 0755, when a deafening roar from the southwest broke the calm of the morning. 16 aircraft, flying very low in 2 groups of 8, swept in toward Utah. They were Kate torpedo bombers from the Japanese carriers Hiryu and Soryu. Before launch, their pilots had been instructed to strike only battleships and aircraft carriers, and none were expected to be anchored along Ford Island's west side. Even so, 6 Soryu pilots misunderstood the orders and attacked. 2 fired torpedoes at Utah, 2 at Detroit, and 2 at Raleigh. The torpedoes meant for Detroit missed and buried themselves in the mud along Ford Island. Raleigh was struck by 1 torpedo and immediately began to list. Both weapons aimed at Utah hit amidships within seconds at 0801, tearing open her hull. With no watertight integrity, she began listing rapidly. By 0805, the list had reached 40 degrees, making it clear she would soon overturn. These planes were part of a 350 aircraft strike launched from 6 Japanese carriers, attacking Oahu's military sites in 2 waves an hour apart. Many first-wave bombers concentrated on the east side of Ford Island, where the U.S. battleships, their primary objectives, lay moored. Within minutes, most had suffered multiple bomb or torpedo hits and were either settling on the harbor floor or burning fiercely as fuel and ammunition ignited. On Ford Island's west side, the torpedo strikes set off a range of reactions among Utah's crew. Those topside realized almost immediately that the ship was going to roll, and their urgency to escape increased as machine gun fire raked the decks. Many, such as William Hughes, leapt overboard and swam to the nearby concrete mooring quays for cover. Others, including Lee Sosi and Warren Upton, slid down the barnacle-coated hull, swam ashore, and took shelter in a freshly dug utility trench. Although Soucy had abandoned his first aid kit on the ship, he spent most of the day tending to wounded sailors. Below decks, electrician's mate third-class Dave Smith, one of the ship's crane operators, heard the rising roar of aircraft engines and looked out a porthole just in time to spot the red insignia on the planes that had launched torpedoes at Utah. "I suddenly realized we were being attacked by Japanese planes," he recalled. "When the torpedo struck and the ship began to list, I rushed to the main deck, climbed down the starboard side, and swam ashore." Seaman John Vason likewise felt the torpedo impacts and sensed the ship beginning to heel over. He paused to secure fans and other electrical gear and switch on the emergency lights. As the vessel rolled, Vason had to dodge falling machinery and loose equipment that turned into lethal projectiles. When Utah finally settled into the mud, he was still alive, but trapped in a dark, disorienting, upside-down world. He realized his only hope of survival was to reach the bilges, which would lie above the waterline in the harbor's shallow depths. Using the flashlight he'd been repairing when the torpedoes struck, he made his way to the nearest bilge hatch. Finding, fortunately, that the large wrench needed to open, it was still hanging in its usual spot. After squeezing through the hatch, Vason saw water rising behind him. Once he reached the inner hull, he began pounding with the hatch wrench he always kept for emergencies, continuing even as painful blisters formed on his hands. The water had crept to within 8 feet of him when he finally heard answering knocks and faint voices outside. Shore personnel had detected his tapping and returned to the hull to pinpoint it. They took a launch to Raleigh, retrieved a cutting torch and crew, and hurried back. The water was only 3 feet away when Vason noticed a glowing red circle forming on the steel as the torch cut through. It was a race between the rising water and the rescuers. Moments later, they finished the cut and punched the disc through. When they pulled Vason out, burned, bruised, but alive, water was already lapping at his heels. He was the only crewman rescued through the hull. Not every sailor trapped below when the torpedoes hit sought escape topside. Chief Water Tender Peter Tomich understood that if cold seawater reached the superheated boilers, they would explode, killing everyone still aboard. Someone had to stay to secure them. As Utah began to capsize, Tomich knew what must be done. He ordered all boiler room personnel to get out at once. "Get out now, leave immediately," he shouted. Then, disregarding his own command, he went to work. As his men glanced back, he was already spinning valves and adjusting gauges. The ship kept rolling as he labored, and he knew that by the time he finished, any hope of escape would be gone. That certainty did not stop him. He continued his life-saving actions fully aware that his own death was only minutes away. For knowingly giving his life to save others, Tomich was awarded a posthumous Medal of Honor. In the wake of the attack on Pearl Harbor, salvage crews first focused on ships that had sustained the least damage and could be restored to service most quickly. By the 1930s, USS Utah had been converted into a radio-controlled target, an anti-aircraft training platform, her decks covered with thick wooden timbers for protection during exercises. Because of this role, the severity of her damage, and her location in a less critical part of the harbor, plans to salvage Utah became a matter of debate. To assess each wreck, hundreds of dives were carried out under extremely hazardous conditions. Much of Pearl Harbor remained choked with oil and debris, rendering lights nearly useless in the murky water. Divers had to feel their way through dark, twisted passages, relying on memory of ship blueprints while avoiding sharp metal that could tear their air hoses. Air pockets inside wrecks often held toxic gases like hydrogen sulfide that could ignite from torch flames. Several divers were killed during these operations, including one working on Utah. In early 1942, an initial evaluation found Utah firmly embedded on the harbor floor, but stable enough for limited salvage. Divers slowly cut through her exposed hull and began entering compartments, recovering much of her remaining ordnance. Because hydrogen sulfide had been detected in some spaces, respirators were required even in areas that had been pumped out. No trace of the 54 still missing crewmen was found. By late February 1942, deteriorating conditions and rising concern for workers' safety brought ordnance recovery to a halt. A year later, salvage teams returned, hoping to employ methods similar to those used to right the capsized Oklahoma. But after 13 months of preparation, attempts to roll Utah upright failed. Instead of pivoting on the harbor floor, she sank deeper into the mud as the winches pulled. Eventually, it was concluded that the cost and time involved would not warrant continuing, since the ship was already in the most stable position possible and out of the shipping lane. For several days, the wreck was monitored to ensure its stability, with divers checking her condition below the surface. On March 15, 1944, all diving operations on Utah ended, marking the conclusion of the post-attack salvage efforts. When a renewed proposal to clear the berth was rejected in 1956, the Navy officially declared Utah a permanent war grave. Although 54 Utah crewmen remain entombed in the hull, a remarkable discovery in 2000 revealed there are actually 55 sets of remains aboard. Mary Wagner Cry, daughter of former crewman Chief Yeoman Albert Wagner, disclosed an astonishing secret she had kept for nearly 6 decades. The ashes of her twin sister, Nancy Lynn Wagner, have rested inside Utah since the ship sank in 1941. Nancy died at birth in 1937 in Makati, Philippines. Mary survived after months in the hospital. Wagner had Nancy cremated and later brought the urn aboard Utah, intending to scatter her ashes at sea once a chaplain was assigned. That opportunity never came. Burials at sea were a tradition in the Wagner family. Just a year earlier, in 1936, while serving on USS Pennsylvania, he had carried out such a burial for another daughter, Helen, who also died at birth. Divers inspecting Utah weeks after the attack attempted to reach Wagner's quarters to recover Nancy's urn, but could not penetrate the wreckage. The urn remained inside the ship, becoming the unintended burial at sea Wagner had wished for his child. Though Mary kept the secret for decades, she made repeated visits to the Utah to honor her sister, traveling there annually since 1990. Unfortunately, today, it is quite restricted to the general public. No Navy launch transports visitors there, and access is possible only from Ford Island, still an active military base. Civilians require formal permission to enter. Though access can be granted, only a few dozen visitors reach the Utah Memorial annually, a stark contrast to the 1.5 million who visit the Arizona Memorial. Many who visit Arizona remain unaware that the Utah Memorial lies less than a mile away. Ironically, had the Navy succeeded in removing Arizona's hull in 1942, Utah would have been the only remaining attack casualty in the harbor and would likely have become the main focus of memorial efforts. But unfortunately, until the Utah Memorial is transferred to the National Park Service and proper access is given, she will continue to be the forgotten battleship of Pearl Harbor. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you love World War II, you should join my free community in the video description and pinned comment to learn even more and talk to other history lovers. See you there!